Yeah, no worries.
Okay, so this is Todd Atkins, and I'm here with Matt Lucas, who is the host of the On Fighting in Thailand podcast. And I encourage everybody to go listen to it as far as, hearing his backstory and, his involvement in Thailand. He's involved in a lot of different things. So for people who may not know you, maybe you could just kind of introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I am Matt Lucas, obviously. I have been living out here in Thailand for the last 5 years. I came out for the first time about 10 years ago, maybe 12. It was a while ago. And I used to fight more. Now I work as a commentator at Max Muay Thai and the social media manager at Fairtex. Like you said, I've done On Fighting in Thailand, the podcast for the last 2 years. I put out a book titled the same, which is a basic guide about the sport out here. I recently helped publish a memoir for Michael Chase Corley, the president of the USMF, the United States Muay Thai Federation. That's Muay Thai Grit. It's stories about his fight career. So I first came out to Thailand on a training trip. I fought out here, and then I basically kept coming back and really snowballed in terms of my career and everything like that.
Let's talk about when you first went, because you obviously wanted to come to Thailand really badly. You had an interest. What was it like that first time you get there? What were you thinking? Like,
Yeah, I came out, I think it was in 2007 or so. So the landscape of, the world was a lot different. There was internet, but it wasn't the same level of connection for people, So there were internet cafes, and finding information about gyms and stuff was a lot harder. I remember actually losing my wallet in a cab and it just being like a huge disaster. But you lose your wallet now, it's not as big of a deal. You can figure things out a lot faster in terms of getting money places and all that sort of stuff. So it was just a lot different. There weren't as many foreigners out here as well. Just the level of connections for foreigners is a lot higher right now. So it was really interesting. I liked it a lot. It was a bit adventurous, meaning, there were a lot more problems, but still very good time and experience.
now, the first time were you coming there? Was it to fight or were you just training kind of?
Yeah, so the first time I was actually just coming out to train, I ended up fighting. I was very nervous about fighting initially because I didn't know that there were different, basically, levels to the sport. And I assumed that if I fought out here, I would be matched against like some, super high ranking fighter. But that is not true. A good gym will match you appropriately to your skill level. And when I fought, um, I was matched appropriately. I fought at Teppersit Stadium at a very small local show. My opponent was, the same skill level as me, more or less. So it was a really good experience.
And how long did you stay there that first time?
That first time I stayed for 3 months. That is the tourist visa limit for, unless you do multiple reentries, and that's about how much time I could get off of work and whatnot. So I stayed for 3 months, and then I came back for 3 months the second time. Again, I think I did 3 months, and then I came back and stayed. I think I had one more trip in there as well, but just for a couple weeks.
So when you first went, was it all planned out as far as I'm going to get there, I'm going to stay 3 months, I know where I'm staying, all this kind of stuff?
So when I first came out, I knew that I wanted to train, and I had a couple gyms in mind. So I had been recommended to train at Ingram Gym, which is still open and running. It's on Palam C Road in sort of mid Bangkok. At the time, it was in Ekamai, which is more even downtown Bangkok. So I started training there and I liked it a lot, but I wanted to see the world a little bit. And I went to Sityodtong and Pattaya for about a week. Um, I decided to go back to Ingram and I stayed there. It's owned by a Japanese expat, Hideki Suzuku, and I really liked the regimented training. It wasn't, it was not like super sabai, and we did the same thing every day. And I really liked that a lot. So, I stuck with it. And then, over time, I sort of gained enough confidence. I was like, okay, I'm going to try and fight. So I asked Hideki to fight, and he set me up with a bout in Pattaya.
Now, when you first went there, were there as many foreigners as maybe there is now?
There's definitely not as many. I think that the internet has really opened up a lot of possibilities for people, just in terms of how much information is going back and forth, and pricing. Pricing is a lot easier to understand. Every gym has websites. One of the reasons why I picked Ingram was because they had a website with the pricing. A lot. Before, a lot of gyms did not. So I worked at FA Group in Bangkok for about 2 years, starting 5 years ago, and they didn't have a website at the time, and they just relied on a sort of messy Facebook to sort of invite foreigners to train. So there just wasn't as much information, so that made it a lot harder for the foreigners to come over. And then now you have a whole sports tourism industry that runs out of the country, or at least prior to COVID. I think it will probably pick back up once COVID has coughed its last breath.
And how do you think you were received the first time? What was it like, being one of the few foreigners?
Yeah, so it was definitely unique. Um, I remember going out to Johnson gym. Johnson on Fairtex is a decent friend of mine. And after I had that fight, or no, my second visit a year later, so in like 2008, 2009, it's still not a lot of foreigners. And I remember going out to Isan, the rural northeast of Thailand. It's where a lot of the fighters are from. And just there were no foreigners out there. So in general, not a lot of foreigners go to Isan, but now there's more long-term expats living out there. It's not a ton, but every village has like a couple of foreigners. But then there was zero, so it was very, very surreal for me. I remember I went to like a temple fair or something, and the MC, the like announcer and singers were like, "Oh, hey everyone, we have a foreigner here," and everyone just turns and looks at me. I was like, "Oh my god, I'm so embarrassed." It was a very, very unique and good experience, though.
But were the people like really receptive? Like I lived in Japan, and when you get out into the rural areas, you're looked at like almost like an alien. They are surprised to see you.
Mm-hmm.
As to where in Tokyo, no one even cares that you're around. So, what did you think of
Yeah,
your reception out there?
yeah. I mean, in Isan and in Bangkok, it's always been sort of like, "Oh, you're just here." I feel like when I first came out, it was a little more unique. So like people were a little more curious, especially because I lived in residential areas like Anu at the first, my first visit. So it was a bit more, unique. I would be the only guy on this, the only foreigner on the SkyTrain and stuff. Not like stairs, but it'd be like, oh, that's curious. When I went to Isan, it was like people were very like, wow, a foreigner. We've never seen a foreigner before. This is really weird, and not not in a bad way, or just a sort of curiosity. Um, you know, the Thais generally are pretty receptive and open to people. So there's not a lot of animosity when you meet them, but there is like genuine curiosity and sort of a good natured kindness to them.
So they approach you when
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
out there?
They'll be more approachable, or they'll sort of like, smile and giggle. I remember like some young girls like sort of my age or a little younger at the time were sort of like, oh hey, you know. So it's not very cold or anything like that. It's a little awkward, but it was mainly nice at the time.
Now let's kind of talk about I remember you talking on the first podcast about how there's two audiences for Muay Thai.
Hmm.
Like a betting audience or gambling audience and then an entertainment audience. I
Hmm.
wonder if you could expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, so Um, just in terms of the way the sport has developed over time is, you know, basically in the 1980s and 90s, the sport really boomed in Thailand. There was a big economic boom in the country, and then in the late 90s, there was an economic collapse. So a lot of people during that time in the late 80s and early 90s were moving into the city from Isan, from the rural areas. So they made up a big chunk of the sort of fans of Muay Thai. The sport has generally come from that area of Thailand. So there were fans of the sports in the stadiums along with the gamblers. There's always been gambling in the sport and gambling, in most sports. So, anyways, the in the late 90s, lots of fans, lots of normal people. It's both entertainment and gambling. And then what happens is there's the economic collapse, and the normal fans start leaving the stadiums. So there's a couple of reasons why that happened. Potentially the economic collapse. Partially, there's more choices. TV starts going so people can watch the fights at home rather than go to the stadiums. There's more things like soap operas, the rise of the internet. There's a lot more choices for people. So the fans leave the stadiums, but the gamblers stay. Um, so the gamblers slowly start to, take over the stadiums, not in a malicious way, but because they're providing the income for the stadium, the sport starts being geared towards that. The sport is a business. So as a business, you want to sort of be geared towards your consumers. And the gamblers are the main consumers. So the sport starts becoming more gambling oriented. The first and second rounds are a bit slower, and then third and fourth, it picks up. They fight more actively, and then in the fifth round, it's more or less decided. So that's sort of what's happened with the stadiums. And then as the internet grew and the sports started going international, the entertainment side came back in. So there was shows like Max Muay Thai began, which began on like a weekly basis. They had some regional tournaments and then a weekly basis, and they are definitely geared towards like more casual fans. It's a 3-round format, and you're supposed to fight from right away. Um, and at the beginning, they had some really good high level bouts. Bukaw was on the show, Jordan Watson, a lot of high level foreign fighters and Thais as well. Remember, I recently did a video with Rob Cox, and he talks a lot about the history of the show. So, anyways, there's sort of this entertainment sort of factor that comes in, or entertainment style that's a bit more flashy, that's a bit more palatable. The gambling is maybe there, but to a very small degree. It doesn't really influence things as much. And you sort of see the entertainment side growing relatively rapidly. So now you have like Channel 8, which has Super Champ and Muay Hardcore. There's been other shows like MX. Then there was one at, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it. Thai Fight has been around. And of course, it's also a lot of the entertainment aspects have been exported internationally. So now you have things like One Championship with, their Muay Thai sort of division, which I would say draws a lot from, the history of things like Max Muay Thai.
You talked about how there was kind of like a pattern for how the fights would go,
Mm-hmm.
in the first round, second round, third round. Why is that? Who dictated that? As to where you're saying now these other events, like where they're fighting right away. Why did that happen that way?
So it's about, it's about money. So all the fighters are fighting for money. So there's a couple factors, going into this. So there's one, as a fighter, you want to win. Where at the stadiums, you want to win. On the entertainment shows, you just want to fight. Because they care more about you putting on an exciting fight, because that's what draws in the fans. For the stadiums, they want like a close bout that, is good to sort of gamble on, because that's the majority of their audience. So when you fight, you're thinking about how to score points, how to win, and when you win, there's also the bonus that you might get from the gamblers at cheat, which is a cash injection after the bout. So, say I gamble 100,000 baht on Todd to win. Okay, and then you win, I will, typically give you a percentage of my winnings, maybe 10, 20%. So, you have which would be like 10 to 20,000 baht. And you have your normal wages, which is maybe, 10 to 20,000 baht. And then it's basically doubled because of this, handout from the gamblers. So you're trying to win the game and appease the gamblers at the same time. And then, so as you fight, you're trying to get the gamblers to get excited about the fight. So you might not show all your weapons right away. That way the odds go up. And then, okay, the fight goes into the third and fourth round. It's an actual fight. And then once you've won, you need to protect your lead. So you're not going to endanger, your salary and how much money you're going to make by trying to go for a knockout or something like that. Whereas, at entertainment shows, there's bonuses for, knockouts and special performances. So, then it's sort of like, okay, well, it doesn't matter that I'm losing, because I can potentially make more money by just like throwing myself out on the line. So it's a bit, economically based. I mean, of course, there are cultural things going on and other factors, but I would definitely say the economics of it plays a big part.
So even in a fight where a guy would probably be pretty confident that he could win maybe quickly, he would just drag it out for the gambler aspect.
Well, yeah, potentially. Or he's not gonna endanger himself as much. That's not to say they're not gonna try to knock each other out. If you're fighting, Rob, and Rob seems like a tomato can, you're not gonna drag it out and toy with him. You're gonna be like, okay, I just knock him out, it's fine. But in a close fight where you've like made enough of a lead, you might be like, okay, that's enough. Like, I'm gonna start protecting my lead.
It's interesting. I always knew what Muay Thai was, but I think I've started to get more interest into it watching One Championship lately. and seeing some of these crossover fighters. As a fan of mixed martial arts basically from the beginning in 93, to see some of these, I still feel like Muay Thai and Thai fighters in general are untapped resource
Mhm.
in mixed martial arts. So I was wondering what you thought about kind of like some of them competing in one. I know you know a lot of these people, so you know, I
Yeah,
was just
I
curious.
yeah, I think it's a untapped resource as well. Now that more Thai fighters and people from Muay Thai backgrounds are transitioning into MMA, I think it's becoming more exciting. To be honest, I never really paid attention to MMA until like the Thais and other good strikers started fighting. And, I definitely think that the stand up aspect of MMA is generally the more exciting portion of it. So, you see some bouts and with the Thai fighters, and they're really exciting. So recently, uh, Yod Kai Gao or Y2K Fairtex fought this guy, Alex Schilt, out of Tiger Muay Thai on one championship maybe 3 months ago. And it was a really exciting fight because Alex was a very good grappler and, very good at the ground game. Y2K was, very good at stand up, obviously. And Y2K really utilized his stand up against Alex, basically leg kicking him to death. Um, and it was a really, really exciting fight with a, very clear game plan that was executed well by the Thai fighters. So it made it more exciting. So yeah, I think that the Thais are generally very untapped in terms of potential, but they also still need to learn a bit more about MMA as a sport, which is definitely happening as more and more BJJ and MMA people are coming to Thailand and training.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of them are from Fairtex, or maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know, like what the diversity of it M1 is from different camps, but obviously the ones from Fairtex like Stamp and
Mhm.
Y2K that you mentioned that are popular, you know. So what do you I know you've been involved with Fairtex and stuff. What do you think about how they're doing in one, and how Stamp's been doing, how Y2K people like that are doing?
Yeah, I think that they're doing very well. I mean, still they have a lot of experience as combat athletes, but anytime you transition sports, it's a new sport. So, you might be an excellent Muay Thai fighter, but a very mediocre kickboxer, or you might be an excellent kickboxer, but you not aren't. That doesn't necessarily translate into MMA. So I do think that as um, athletes transitioning into new sports, they're doing very well. Stamp's last performance on one championship was very, very good. She dominated, 3 rounds, and then, the referee sort of saw that she tapped. Stamp said that she was like moving her arm up her opponent, but the referee saw a tap, definitely understandable. But regardless, it was a really good performance. There's, the country in general is going up in terms of the level of the MMA fighters. There's some good fighters of Tiger Muay Thai. There's that guy Shannon who's pretty good. He recently beat Fabio Pinca, who is a very, very decorated Muay Thai fighter. He's a Raja Demner champion, and Shannon is sort of like, you know, he he's not like a super high level MMA fighter, and he was able to beat Fabio. So that was really interesting as well. So I think like the level of MMA is slowly going up out here.
And what do you think about? I don't know how much of the UFC fights you watch, but it seems like the low calf kick is becoming a real big thing in the UFC lately. And as someone with as much experience as you have, what do you think about that? Like how effective it's becoming in the UFC, and I mean, just in general, what do you think about that whole thing?
Yeah, I think, if a Muay Thai fighter was downed by like that sort of thing, it would be sort of embarrassing. Um,
Right.
it's a being able to block leg kicks is a pretty fundamental thing from the get-go. There are fighters like Daniel McGowan has knocked people out with a similar sort of kick, and Liam Harrison as well. But Conor McGregor didn't eat that many of those leg kicks. Um, maybe like 3 or 4, and then he's like limping around. Usually, a Muay Thai fighter will have to take a lot more damage for it to sort of stop them. I think, someone like Liam will blast away at the legs like, 15 or 20 times, and then the person's done for, or Daniel McGowan as well. So I think it shows some pretty big flaws in the MMA stand up.
Yeah, that's one thing I was wondering, like, because you see people kind of debating this whole thing, people on, various Twitter forums or whatever. Can someone like condition their leg to take that kick more, like you're talking about Thai fighters getting welled away on like 15, 20 times?
Yeah.
Is it a thing where
So
if they don't check it, it's going to be a problem quicker?
yeah, I mean, it's sort of one of those things where the more fights you have, the more experience you have taking damage, so it doesn't hurt you as much. Also, when you fight, your bones break a little, creating micro fissures, and then they recalcify, becoming stronger. So your shin bone will actually be sort of bumpy like this. So you're able to sort of take more damage on it when you do block it. So the experience of blocking and everything, and having that fight experience is going to make it so your leg is just stronger.
So, because I was seeing people say that people can't condition their legs to take those kicks, but I think over time through sparring and the training, as you're talking about, and the fights, there is some conditioning that comes into play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is some level of conditioning that comes into play, and it's not something that you can do, condition by like hitting your leg with a stick, or rubbing a soda bottle on your leg. It needs to come from regular sparring, training, and fighting, basically.
So, as you're seeing more of these, like people competing in one and stuff, like I talked to Jake Hune. I don't know if you know who he is, but I think he was training at Tiger for a period of time. And he's
Mm-hmm.
telling me there's just tons of gyms now right around that
Mm-hmm.
area, and there's all kinds of foreigners pouring in now. So it's
Yeah.
totally changed the face of Thailand now as far as the Muay Thai goes.
Well, I wouldn't say it's totally changed it, but it has added an element to it. Sports, Phuket and Tiger Road, Soi Tilled in Phuket is, it's a huge hub for sports tourism. So people will come to Thailand, work out for a while, maybe have a low level fight, and then, it's this experience, it's the package experience, which is really good, and it helps grow the sport, and there's, nothing wrong with it. But, it's just a different aspect of the sport. Um, Bangkok is still mainly the center of the serious fighters, especially with the stadiums here. Other regions have their own sort of local scenes. Obviously Max Muay Thai is in Pattaya, and so it had a lot of gyms that sort of fed off of that with regular fighters. In Chiang Mai, there's a pretty active scene. They had a very good female scene up there because they have all these like female vocational schools up there. So the young women in the schools and colleges would fight regularly. And then they have a decent, low level scene out there for fighters as well. And then Isan, is very, very regular in the past with fights as well. So, you just have like these different regions. And just because one region is doing something doesn't mean that it's like changing the face of everything. it, the reason why people might perceive it as changing everything is because Phuket in that area has the most foreigners, and the foreigners are exposing other foreigners. So, most foreigners do not ever go out to Isan and fight out there. Um, I think that there's a lot of different reasons for that. It's not comfortable. It's far. There's not as much infrastructure out there, and there's no beautiful beaches. Whereas going to Phuket is very, very easy now. There's beautiful beaches. People speak English. It's an easier package to buy.
Now, you mentioned that more fighters come out of the Isan area. Why is that?
I think it's a combination of like sort of cultural, economic reasons. So, culturally, the sport comes. A lot of fighters have just regionally come from that area, so everyone sort of grows up with it. It's sort of like when the Midwest in America being very, very well known for wrestling. Why is that? Well, it's a little bit of culture. There's a long history of wrestlers, maybe some of it's economics, being stuck in the middle of the country. You don't have access to the big cities where other sports are played, where there's arenas and stuff. So it's hard to pinpoint 100% why, but a lot of the boxers are coming from that area. There's not as much opportunities for money making. So, money making through Muay Thai is, a viable option in Isan in the rural Northeast.
And how do these fighters make decisions? Because I know, like, just watching one like Stamp and Wonder Girl, some of these different fighters have decided to go to Fairtex.
Mm-hmm.
Is there certain gyms that are attracting these, or is it kind of spread out?
Yeah, so a lot of it's like a normal sport. You have scouts and you have different levels of different gyms. So say you're Todd, you start fighting. You're gonna start fighting at 10 years old. You're gonna get paid 100 baht for your first fight. Your dad or whatever is gonna sort of show you how to kick a little and punch a little. The same sort of thing as like your dad teaches you how to like throw a football or maybe score a 3-pointer. He's not gonna teach you like in-depth stuff about the sport. But you start playing regularly, maybe you get good, you show some potential, and then you're scouted by a local guy that goes to the fights all the time, who has a connection to a bigger, better gym. So it'd be similar as like, okay, you're a high school all-star, and then a college scout comes to one of your games and sees you. It's sort of the same sort of thing. So, and then you move on from there. So typically you're recruited, maybe 16, 17 into your 20s to a bigger gym like Fairtex or Pet Indy, Sorsamai, Jit Muang Non. There's like a bunch of big gyms. And then they sort of throw you into it and see like how you do and how you develop.
Yeah, so they have, like their own like dormitories and everything for these fighters, and they house them and everything. I know you were talking about that on your podcast, so kind of expand on that a little, because that's interesting. You don't see that a lot here in the U.S., even at the bigger gyms necessarily.
Yeah, well, I mean, the structure of the gyms in the U.S. is a lot different than out here. So the contracts in general for fighters are about 7 years long. So you're initially you may or may not have a contract with your dad who's like bringing you up from the get-go, but then once you go to an established gym, you sign a contract which is certified through the Sports Authority of Thailand. generally it's about a 7-year contract. The split is, 50-50. So you fight, for, whatever your purse is, maybe, 4,000 baht. That means you keep 2,000 baht and the gym gets 2,000 baht. In return, the gym will feed, train, and house you. So they will generally have like some sort of housing situation for you, depending on how good the gym is. So a gym like Fairtex, okay, they have like nice rooms and dormitories for everyone. Some another gym that might not be as nice. Maybe you share a room with a bunch of the fighters. So there's sort of different levels to the infrastructure of the gyms as well.
Now, what is dollar to baht?
It's about 30. It's 30 baht to the dollar. And uh, in terms of the purse sizes I've given you, they're all like off the cuff. They're not. You shouldn't take them as how much you would actually be making. So like, in terms of first fight, like most kids make about 100 baht per fight. To start, like your very first fight, you'll see 100 to 150 baht, something like that. When you get to the entertainment shows, like, sort of low level entertainment shows, you make maybe 10,000 baht, so $300 per fight. If you move into the stadiums, you can make higher. You can go, a decent level, like mid-level fighter will make 50 to 60,000 baht. The high level fighters will make about 100,000 baht, so about $3,000. Then internationally, you can make more. You can make like 5,000, and there's some that are even making like $10,000. So, and that's a lot of money when like a plate of pad thai is like $1. And you're not even going out for pad thai that much. And of course, it's worth noting that women in general have a bit of a glass ceiling for their wages. They generally they don't get access to stadium wages, but there are some international opportunities opening up for them.
Right. By competing in one, they can maybe make some, comparable money or possibly.
Yeah, exactly. So for Stamp, she didn't really have an option to go like, okay, I can make like 50, 60,000 baht. She went from, okay, like I've hit my cap of maybe 7,000-8,000 baht fighting on these shows, and then there's nothing there to go beyond it, until you like shows like One Championship came around, and then okay, she can make some real money. She can make like $5,000. She can make $10,000. But before that, there was no career progression for her, which limits a lot of women's interest in pursuing the sport as like a full-time thing.
Yeah, and so she were to make 5 or 10 grand, Fairtex would get half, basically.
Yeah. So if say Stamp gets $5,000 for a fight, generally the cut is, she keeps 2,500 and the camp gets 2,500. So there's an economic interest in terms of the camp to sort of grow Stamp's career and to get her better and to make her more money.
Now, is the training for somebody like that, do they lay it all out every day, like you're going to do this, this, and this? Or do they go to the gym and kind of train as they see fit?
Yeah, so when you start off at a lower level, it's very unstructured. And then generally, as you move higher and higher into the better gyms, the more structured it is. So generally for an established gym, the routine is relatively the same. morning run of about an hour. It's a slow run. Then you hit pads, you hit the bag, you spar or clinch, and then you do sit-ups and calisthenics. The process repeats again in the afternoon. Fairtex and some other gyms are now incorporating strength and conditioning routines. So at Fairtex, the boxers will do the run in the morning, and then two or 3 days a week just do a strength and conditioning session. And then there's more specific training for the fighters now.
Yeah, and I noticed that like DJ Jackson was teaching at Fairtex, so they're incorporating more grappling into their training, or that's what I mean. Is it regimented? Like, okay, you have to go do this grappling X amount of days a week, or these things that they have more freedom to decide whether they're going to go do or not?
No, the athletes are sort of regimented in that they need to do like 3 days a week. I believe it's 3 days a week of grappling training if they're doing MMA. So like Stamp, for instance, has to do 3 days a week normally. And then the other fighters need to be spending like at least half an hour almost every day if they're looking to transition into MMA. So like right after Muay Thai practice, they go and do some basic routines and drills with DJ to sort of improve their BJJ. Later on, as they become more serious, they have to invest more time into it.
And, how many of them do you see, like, I mean, most of them are fighting in one. Do you ever see, like, or foresee some of these ties maybe crossing over into the UFC or something like that?
I do. Obviously you have Loma Lookboonmee, who is fighting out of Tiger Muay Thai. She's the first Thai signed to the UFC and has done very well for herself. I think she's like 3-1. Don't quote me on that. But she's done very well for herself. And she's used her Muay Thai to great advantage. So I do see some of that transition happening. I think it's going to be a little slow. Obviously, with one championship based in Asia, it's easier for the Thais to go to one championship. But I assume that as MMA in Thailand grows, there's going to be more migration internationally. So that means migration to the UFC. It means migration to other shows, Bellator or Invicta, the other shows around the world.
Now, let's kind of talk about some of the other stuff you're doing besides your podcast and stuff, because I know you have your hands in a lot of different things in Thailand.
Yeah, so I obviously have the podcast, which I put out about every 2 weeks. I do series. The last series I did was on female fighters. The next series I will do is on Australian Muay Thai history. And then I think I'm going to do Thai fighters that have gone abroad. And then I will do one about the business of the sport. So each series is of 4 or 5 episodes, 3 to 5 episodes centering on one subject. Then I have the book, which, as I said before, is a guide to the sport. So some of the things that we talked about today, but a bit more in depth. And there's a lot of interviews with fighters. I have a very active Instagram account where I interview fighters. I do vocabulary stuff, sort of talk about the industry in a lot of ways. I recently helped edit the book Muay Thai Grit, which is memoirs of a Muay Thai fighter, Michael Chase Corley, who was out here for quite some time and fought on some pretty high-level shows. Just his experiences with it. So doing a lot of different things. Oh, and I help manage a couple fighters, and I'm involved in Muay Thai Gram, which is a very large Instagram account. And then we have a solid website now. So we're doing more things with that. I mentioned it before, but we recently put out a sort of documentary interviewing Rob Cox, who's the English language commentator at Max Muay Thai and a long-term sports journalist out here. He sort of gives the history of Max Muay Thai. So, a lot of different things going on.
And so your involvement in Muay Thai, you're basically making a living off of the stuff you're doing in Muay Thai now.
Yeah, I'm very, very lucky to say that I make a living off of Muay Thai. I couldn't do it if I didn't live out here in Thailand, but I am able to, make a living off the sport, which, I'm very lucky to do so. When I first moved out here, there were only a couple people doing it, but now there's more, and there's more and more opportunities growing for people. It's still, it's not easy, and obviously COVID has sort of reduced the sort of trajectory of people, or reduced career growth, but the sport is growing. And when I first came out, like I said, maybe only 3 or 4 people, and now there's 13 or so.
And with the MMA popularity, you can kind of cross over and do some of that as well. Is that something you're looking to do?
That is not necessarily something I'm looking to do, because I feel like the sport of Muay Thai is growing a lot, and this is where my interest lies, but I'm not discounting it.
But I mean, as fighters are competing in it, is
Oh
it
yeah,
something that you kind of have to get involved in a little bit?
yeah. That is definitely true, especially because Fairtex has so many MMA fighters. It is something I'm learning more and more about, and I'm slowly becoming to appreciate MMA more. Uh, as I see more of my friends fighting, as I know more about the sport, I am beginning to like the sport a lot more.
Now, the stuff you do with certain gyms like Fairtex, for example, was that something where they approached you and asked you to help them, or how did that work out?
Yeah, so I started working at FA Group as a foreign liaison, and I was there for about 2 years. And then there was a job opening at Fairtex, and so I applied for it and I got it. I already had a background in doing a lot of the stuff that they needed. I'm the social media manager there, so I take care of the Instagram and Facebook, do videos, do some writing stuff, little bit of everything. So yeah, they basically put out a call for it, and I was, the most qualified person for it. So I got the job, and it's been a little over 2 years that I've been there.
And, how much requirement does it take you to do these certain jobs? Like, for example, the social media, how busy does that keep you, for example?
Yeah, so it doesn't, it's in terms of the hours, I would say, it's a part-time job. So it gives me a lot of freedom to work on other things. I have an apartment right at the training camp, right at the training center. So it's very easy for me to access the gym. So it's not a full-time position, but I it does take some level of skill that you can develop on the job mainly. There's different skills that you're working, copywriting, doing captions, writing blog articles. Then there's, the social media skills of itself. Okay, this does well on social media, this doesn't, then there's, video editing and photography. So it's not easy, but there's skills that you can learn along the way if, you're super interested.
And do you see something as Thailand being something you're going to be there permanently, you think?
Yeah, more or less. I've been out here for 5 years, a little over 5 years, and I don't think I will move back to the States. I'm originally from upstate New York and then lived for a long time in Oakland in the Bay Area. And, there's a couple of different reasons why I wouldn't move back, but one of them, of course, is economical. You know, I make about $2,000 a month out here, whereas to move back to the Bay Area, for instance, rent alone would be like $2,000 a month. So I would have to save for 2 years to have like a runway to live for like 3 or 4 months in the Bay Area. So it's just, economically, it's a bit far fetched.
Now, for people that kind of want to follow some of the stuff you're doing, and where can they find you? And also maybe some interesting things you're going to be doing coming up that you might want to talk about as we're kind of wrapping up the interview.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. My IG is Matt Lucas Muay Thai. Then I also have a website, matt-lucas.com. The podcast On Fighting in Thailand is on Spotify and iTunes. Muay Thai Gram is a very big Instagram account, and we do some interesting things there. It's called Muay Thai Gram. What are some interesting things I am doing? So I should be doing some cool profile pieces on some of the fighters at Fairtex soon. I'm sort of hoping to do like a lifestyle piece on Stamp soon. On March 2nd, or on International Women's Day, I put together with some friends a cool video featuring Stamp, Wonder Girl, and Apidet. So I'm excited about that. Then I might be doing some more work in the future with some other apps. So, there's definitely a lot of different things going on.
Well, Matt, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. It's really interesting learning more stuff about Thailand, especially someone like me. I've lived in some other countries. So, it really fascinated me. And I noticed like since I'm a fan of mixed martial arts, you don't get a lot of this kind of content or discussions from these kind of sources. So it's something that I really wanted to learn more about. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate you taking the time to, give me a ring and, ask some questions. Always happy to share my knowledge.
I appreciate it again. And thank you very much. It was great talking to you.
Thank you, Todd.